There's one game series that I've always had an interest in trying, but never really got around to it. But I've heard nothing but praise for some of the games, and it's the Batman Arkham series. I don't play a lot of superhero games. The last one I played was Marvel's Spider-Man Remastered, and really, I thought that game was terrific. And before that, I couldn't tell you the last superhero game that I played. It might have been Arkham Asylum back on Xbox 360, because I do vaguely remember starting that game when it first released, but putting it down for who knows why. Listen, as a kid, I really liked playing first-person shooter games, so I probably got a little bored with a game like Batman Arkham Asylum because I didn't really know what was going on. But back to Batman Arkham, it's really a special series if you think about it. Superhero games are usually mediocre at best and tend to be one and dones with a character as a whole in terms of a series. But Batman Arkham has 5 games, 6 if you want to count Suicide Squad Kills the Justice League, and I guess 7 games if you want to count Arkham City Lockdown, which is a very old mobile version of Arkham City. But the main series games alone have sold over 30 million copies, and as someone who loves playing a variety of games, I think it's time I revisit Batman Arkham and give them an honest try. What we're gonna end up doing is talking about Batman Arkham Asylum, Arkham City, Arkham Origins, and Arkham Knight, and just give you my general thought of the game and a review in 2024. I don't intend on 100% in these games because, you know, well, the Riddler trophies, that would be very tedious and mundane in my opinion, but well, let's talk about Batman. The first game I picked up in this series was Arkham Asylum, of course. It was originally released on August 25th, 2009, and I did play this game as a young teenager as I was a Batman fan, but put it down after the first ScareCrow encounter as that's all I remember. I don't know why I put it down, but I do view that as a big mistake as this game was incredible in multiple areas. First, we have the premise of the game where Joker gets himself imprisoned in this asylum and has a lot of his goons and men transferred over to the asylum from the fire at Blackgate Prison. Batman, of course, is skeptical of the Joker giving himself so easily, and for good reason. Joker's real plan is to gain access to the drug Titan to create a henchman army that have the strength of Bane. Really, the plot is fantastic, and it being an original story not from the comics from writer Paul Dini, who has worked on previous DC comics in the past, but this original story for the Arkham series is fantastic for a superhero game. But let's now dive into the game. Arkham Asylum is horrifying, really. The atmosphere immediately gives you eerie vibes from a horror game, but doesn't have horror game elements like jump scares or people being ripped open. For me, the game felt more like a Metroidvania after getting outside of the asylum for the first time. You notice all these areas you don't have access to because you don't have the proper equipment. The pacing for this game is incredible with how quick you can beat it, but the length of the main story isn't a downside as you don't want the game to overstay its welcome. And for me, I beat the game in about 10 hours while not collecting everything. I more so collected as much as I found naturally, and did a few puzzles here and there. And with that, I still got a good amount done. I got 68% of the game done apparently and found just over 100 Riddler trophies. And that's a positive about this game, the amount to actually find. What made this feel like a Metroidvania mostly for me is the fact I'd see a Riddler trophy but have no way to get it until later in the game. The game map is not super big, but every building you go into is filled to the brim with little secrets and collectibles to pick up, which is one of the most positive things. But if you're a big old completionist, have fun finding all of them. The game as a whole had enough to make a casual playthrough near perfect. But this game still has more to talk about, so let's talk about the combat as a whole and even playing and controlling as Batman. Like I said, the atmosphere of the game is horrifying, but the actual environment of the game makes playing Batman feel great. At the time, the best Batman game by a mile. Sorry Batman Beyond on the Nintendo 64, this game is a little bit better. All the tools you have at Batman's disposal on top of detective mode makes for great combat and great puzzle solving. But I will say I felt detective mode could have been utilized better in some areas. For me, I mostly used it to keep track of enemies while trying to be stealthy, and then getting my head blown off because I stink at stealth, and guns are crazy in this game, which makes it more realistic, I'd say. But the general combat, minus fighting people with guns, felt like a rhythm game at times with Batman beating people so senselessly. The combat was good is what I'm trying to say. It felt fluent throughout the whole game, and there's only a small handful of combat mechanics with dodging, punching, stunning, but the ability to use all your tools in combat as well helped keep it engaging. But I mostly punched everyone. It was fun. The game progresses well, like I said earlier, but it also does a good job at introducing more enemies and harder enemies as it progresses. I remember the first time the snipers got introduced in your little hub world that connects everything, and I got blown to shreds immediately, and then I realized I now had to plan accordingly to what I was gonna do. And while the combat flows nicely and enemies stay strong, and I was engaged with general combat for most of the time, one thing that stood out to me was the boss fights as a whole, and the lack of variety variety within them, minus the ScareCrow areas if you want to count those as boss fights. I felt ScareCrow stealth missions were pretty fun, and only having 3 or 4 of them was nice, but the main bosses is where the game lacks the most, I'd say. The main gimmick for a handful of bosses or mini-bosses seem to be throwing the batarang at them while they're running, and it stuns them, allowing you to hit them. It's not a bad mechanic, but I felt it was a little overused after the Bane fight. But the final boss fight as well was incredibly underwhelming to me. It did bug for me the first time, allowing me to get a 40-hit combo, so that's nice, but overall the Joker fight didn't give me that feeling of accomplishment after I beat them, compared to the Poison Ivy fight that I had 20 minutes prior. I really don't have anything else to say about Arkham Asylum. I could talk about the extra content and challenge maps that they added for DLC, but that's not really super noteworthy in my opinion, as it's just beating up some goons. You can also play as the Joker on PS3, which is pretty nice, but it kind of stinks that you can't do it on like Steam or Switch. To my knowledge, you can't do it. But overall, Arkham Asylum is a good game. For the time, it's an incredible superhero video game that clearly inspires a lot of third-person action games, and of course, other incredible superhero games like Spider-Man. It was the first entry into the Arkham series, and it was incredible, and really, it was only the beginning. Because next, we have Batman Arkham City, which released October 18th, 2011, and it's a lot different compared to Arkham Asylum, but at its core is still very similar. This game has been re-released everywhere, and like Arkham Asylum, it reviewed very well. Arkham Asylum has a solid 92 on Metacritic, and Arkham City has a 94. I often see this game regarded as one of the greatest games of all time, and after playing it, I can argue that case, especially if I look at the game and compare it to when it came out in 2011. But before we get into what I think of the gameplay and all the content, let's talk about the story where Bruce Wayne gets arrested by Tiger forces and thrown into Arkham City courtesy of Hugo Strange, who wants to initiate Protocol 10 into the city, which would kill everyone in Arkham City, as everyone in this city is just a criminal. Bruce Wayne is able to get all of his Batman equipment thanks to Alfred, and that leads us to saving Catwoman from getting shot by the Joker, which then leads us to the Joker's hideout, where we learn the Titan formula from the last game is mutated in his blood and slowly killing him. Later in the game, Batman himself gets infected by the blood thanks to the Joker, and we then learn the Joker has sent his blood to hospitals all over Gotham, which puts a lot of innocent civilians in harm's way. Our goal is to get the cure and stop Protocol 10. The story of this game I find more compelling than Arkham Asylum, both great, but this one just had more to it for me. Granted, I never knew about Ra's al Ghul and his immortality, but his blood was the key to creating the cure, alongside working with Dr. Freeze, who I'll say is one very cool villain, no pun intended. The story of the game is rather short, and here comes some spoilers just in case you don't want to be spoiled, but I'm surprised they actually went through of killing the Joker in the second game and fully killing him. As of writing this script, I haven't started Arkham Knight yet, and I'm still playing Arkham Origins, but I don't see a way the Joker's gonna come back when I do play Arkham Knight. It'll be very intriguing to see, but I was shocked by that one. But overall, the story does pace well and does seem a little shorter than the main story of Arkham Asylum, but what this game introduces makes it much more replayable and gives you more content as a whole. Arkham City is filled with Riddler challenges and trophies to collect. I'll say I don't know how they got 440 trophies in here, but it's very impressive. On top of that, almost every villain seems to have some sort of side quest for you to do, and I'll admit, I didn't do as much as I wanted, but the side missions I did do were honestly a lot of fun. From racing down telephones for Victor Zsasz or tracking down Titan containers for Bane, those side quests helped prolong the game and were very easy to do. Arkham City also lets you play as Catwoman, which I didn't do too much of, to be honest. I did all the missions for her if the last mission was gathering her items from Two-Face, but her combat and movement was a faster version of Batman, really, and it was a nice change of pace. I do wish there were a couple more missions related to Catwoman, as it felt like they forgot about her after the mission you go and see Poison Ivy with her, but the times you do play as her are fun, and you can freely swap between Batman and Catwoman once you beat the game. She does have 40 Riddler trophies, so if you're 100% in this game, you'll play her plenty. Really, playing as Batman feels mostly the same as Arkham Asylum. The combat feels more fluid and added a couple more mechanics here and there, but one negative with similarities to Arkham Asylum that Arkham Knight has was boss fights. I felt the boss fights were underwhelming once again in the second entry. The most engaging and unique boss fight was the Ra's al Ghul fight and getting the cure for the Titan disease, but the Penguin fight was barely a challenge, the Dr. Freeze fight was a glorified game of hide and seek, and the Clayface fight was okay. I'll give it some credit there. It wasn't bad, but nothing super memorable. That was one of the biggest lacklusters in this game, just like Arkham Asylum, but it doesn't bring it down with how open world the game is, and all the the extra side content you're able to do. Plus, the combat is still fun. Getting upgrades for your batsuit, it's still fun. This is another fantastic game. And then finally, one last thing this game added that Arkham Asylum did not have was DLC with actual story. Arkham Asylum has a lot of challenges to do post-game, and granted, it's cool and adds some replayability if you want that, but I didn't feel the need to participate in those. But Arkham City added the Harley Quinn's Revenge DLC, which released May 29th, 2012, and that tells the story of Batman getting captured by Harley Quinn, and you play as Robin to save him. Granted, I feel you still play as Batman for 60 to 75% of this DLC, but it was a nice epilogue for the story, and Robin, like Catwoman, was very fun to play as. You could do challenges with him to play as him more, but this added story was fantastic and didn't overstay its welcome, which is something I can say about every Batman game so far. The DLC took me probably an hour and 20 minutes to complete, and that's perfectly fine. Batman Arkham City is considered one of the greatest games of all time, and I can see why. The amount of content it had on top of the open world aspect that it introduced into the Arkham series for a superhero game with fantastic combat and fluid movement throughout the city, it's really incredible. All the people that say Spider-Man is fantastic and the best superhero game, you're probably right, but you gotta play this game to see some inspiration for Spider-Man. They're both fantastic, but for a game made in 2011, Batman Arkham City really just blows it out of the water. It's insane. Next, we played Batman Arkham Origins, which I guess means I was playing these games in release order and not chronological order, which is fine. It was originally released back on October 25th, 2013, and this is the one Arkham game you can't play on the Switch, so if you buy the trilogy on the eShop, you'll be missing out on this little gem. This is also the only Arkham game that was not made by Rocksteady, and instead it was made by WB Games Montreal, so it was a little bit different. But this game is set 8 years before Arkham Asylum, and in this environment, the people of Gotham are unsure if Batman is a hero or more so a vigilante. But the story of this game might be my favorite one so far. The game is set on Christmas Eve, and Black Mask, a mafia boss, sets a $50 million bounty on anyone that can kill Batman, which leads to 8 professional assassins trying to kill him. You battle through Electrocutioner, Deathstroke, Firefly, Bane, and even a villain I never heard of was very intrigued by with Copperhead, a very talented assassin from South America. The story is good, but I did hear this was the shortest Arkham in terms of main story, so this time around I did try to focus on more side quests while playing the game, and I'll say the game does a very good job in introducing side quests to do while progressing the main story. The beginning side quest unlocks fast travel by solving a quick little riddle at several radio towers, which then leads you to destroying 10 networks in each area. Really reminded me of collecting backpacks in the very beginning of Spider-Man, but the towers felt a lot more mandatory as Batman isn't as fluid and smooth in the air as Spider-Man is, so the fast travel felt much more necessary. But the towers weren't super tedious, just a few of them required you to collect more tools in your arsenal to complete them. Now, most of the side quests included in the towers had an assassin or a villain related to them, and after doing the full story, I was still missing a few, but did end up destroying Penguin's gun caches, drug stashes by Black Mask, bombs from Anarchy, the crazy ScareCrow-esque mission from the Mad Hatter, and the assassination attempts from Shiva. I did have Burr show up once the game was done, but I did not complete them. Maybe later in the video I will, but probably not. And along with those missions, you still had random crimes pop up, which were just fighting a bunch of goons, or some crime scenes to investigate, which would also lead to some goon fights most likely. All the side content available in this game was good fun, despite most of it ending up in a goon fight. I'll say I enjoyed the Mad Hatter the most, as it reminded me of the ScareCrow section from Arkham Asylum. As you can tell, ScareCrow is probably my favorite villain in the Batman universe, so anytime there's any missions that remind me of the first time in Arkham Asylum or just anything related to them, I'm gonna like it a little bit more. And with that, I'll say the side quests were up to par with Arkham City. I say that because I did a lot more of them in this game compared to Arkham City, but what stood out the most in this game was the boss fights. That's one thing a lot of people unanimously agree on, and it's that the boss fights in Arkham Origins are the best in the series, and at this rate, I haven't played Night, but so far these boss fights were incredible. The hardest boss fight with Deathstroke was so early on into the game, and I did struggle with it for a good 30 minutes, and the euphoric feeling of beating him reminded me of a Souls-like game. The battle on the bridge with Firefly towards the end of the game was really well done, as you never had to punch him really and relied more on your tools. I will say the camera work there wasn't the best at times, but was still a very unique fight to me. Then earlier in the game, the fight against Copperhead, the villain I knew nothing about that almost kills you with their venom, and you somehow end up fighting her off so close to death and fight 20 different copies at once. And how could we forget the final boss of Bane, which was annoying at times for me, but such an improvement compared to the Bane fight that we had in Arkham Asylum with the regular version of Bane and tons of goons. then the transition to the Titanbane, and throughout all the boss fights, the game gives you your usual tools to win with, but there's one tool I want to quickly highlight that I loved, and it was the shock gloves. I love using the batarang to stun some people or grapple from building to building for some sneak attacks, but the electric gloves have only been seen so far in this game, and they added so much to the combat and puzzles. I'm a little disappointed it's not in other games, but the inclusion of it in Origins was so nice and it enhanced combat tenfold. In my opinion, the game is on par with Arkham City in almost every category, but does do a lot better in boss fights, and in one more area it does a little bit better in my opinion was the story-related DLC. Now this game is like all Arkham games with tons of DLCs for challenges and skins, and I don't really care that much about those, but story DLC is something I can get behind, and the Cold Heart DLC in Arkham Origins was fantastic. It took me about 3 hours to beat, and the premise is that Mr. Freeze kidnaps Ferris Boyle so he can save his wife Nora, as Ferris kind of screwed him over. That's the premise. And my footage for this gameplay got corrupted, so I had to re-record some stuff. And also a special shout out to the Batman Arkham Videos YouTube channel for allowing me to use a little bit of footage from this DLC. They're the best. If you want anything Batman Arkham, check them out. They'll be in the description. But you're limited to the southern portion of the map, and you track down Mr. Freeze and slowly find yourself needing some new upgrades. To survive the sub-zero temperatures created by Mr. Freeze, you get a brand new suit called the XE suit and a new upgrade to the shock gloves, which make them fire gloves. This DLC was nearly perfect to me. It had a small amount of side quests to do with thawing out 20 people, stopping more riots and bombs from Anarchy, and discovering some symbols. The biggest negative was the final boss fight. I found it a little tedious and long, but still enjoyed it more than the boss fights in Arkham Asylum, and found it much more engaging than the Mr. Freeze fight in Arkham City. The DLC was great, and I'm glad I played it. Overall, in my opinion, I think Arkham Origins is better than Arkham City. But I will say Arkham City was more impressive for the time as it came out about 2 years before Arkham Origins. But Arkham Origins had a more disastrous launch as well, I hear. But I felt the boss fights were the biggest improvement in this game, and the ease of side quests is on par with City, maybe better. I need to revisit City, but either way, they're both amazing games, and I was really happy with Origins. Minus multiplayer not working. If you want all the achievements in this one, well, good luck. Multiplayer servers have been down for 7 years, so I can't speak if that was good or not. And now, finally, we're on to Arkham Knight, the game I heard a lot of mixed things about, so going into it, I was a little skeptical. It originally released June 23rd, 2015, and on its release, this game was a disaster on the PC. The game had FPS issues and did not perform well as a whole. It was so bad that WB Montreal suspended sales and even offered refunds on the game, which is crazy to me because the game still sold very well. But regardless of that, let's talk about the main story of the game, which in my opinion is the strongest story in a Batman game. The game starts off with something you never see, and it's a Gotham filled with people and hope. The game is set on Halloween about 1 year after Arkham City, which was set on Christmas Eve, and during that time, Batman struggles with the loss of the Joker as his main nemesis is gone. And I was happy that the Joker was not the main villain in this story, but he still has a major role. But the biggest threat to the city is ScareCrow. You can see why I love this story, as he forces the entire city to evacuate as he threatens to unleash a new fear toxin that he has produced, and he also planted bombs all over the city, of course. ScareCrow's the main villain in the main story, but this game shines with almost every other villain having some type of side quest or mission to do throughout the city, since once the city is empty, it's filled with goons and a huge open world for you to explore. Really, this game is much bigger than Arkham City, about 3 or 4 times bigger, and with that, you have a new mode of transportation with the Batmobile, which is one thing I heard people hated, but we'll get into that soon enough. Back to villains. On top of ScareCrow being the main villain, you need to worry about the Arkham Knight character who knows every one of Batman's moves, and for good reason once you learn that the Arkham Knight is Jason Todd, the original Robin who got kidnapped by the Joker and presumably killed by the Joker. Turns out he's alive and wants vengeance over Batman who seemed to abandon him. Despite learning this backstory of Jason Todd throughout the game with flashbacks and some color commentary from the Joker, I did not expect the Arkham Knight to be them. It was a nice twist for me. As someone who's not super educated in the Batman universe, that can also lead to another major plot point that I liked minus the Arkham Knight, and it's the inclusion of the Joker in this game. If we remember Arkham City, the Joker sent out his diseased blood to different hospitals throughout Gotham, and it turns out 5 people have his blood, and let's call it the Joker disease, and one of those people is Batman. So throughout the game, the Joker has some nice commentary as he's waiting for Batman to go insane so he can take over. I thought that was a great addition, and it reminded me, of course, of Cyberpunk 2077 1997, where you have the terrorist rockstar Johnny Silverhand in your head the entire game, thanks to a heist gone wrong. But I can assume that Cyberpunk got some inspiration from Batman on that angle. Either way, it's a nice addition as the Joker becomes more and more prevalent in the story, and even at the end of the main game, I was very captivated on how the game was gonna end, as I did feel I did something wrong or triggered a bad ending, when more so it was just seeing Batman's worst fear and then the Joker's worst fear thanks to ScareCrow's fear toxin. And quickly, can we just say Kevin Conroy and Mark Hamill voicing these two characters one more time in Arkham Knight? Oh, absolutely perfection. They did a fantastic job as always, so the inclusion of Joker was obviously super nice. Now, I'm not going to go into super hard detail on every chapter in this game, but I still feel strongly that this was the best story. It had major twists and turns at every angle, with Oracle being kidnapped and presumably killed, Commissioner Gordon betraying you for his family, Batman potentially losing in the end, the fun, but sometimes tedious Batmobile missions, and even getting some help from some friends. The story is great and paces very well throughout the game, and like every other Arkham game, the main story did not overstay its welcome. And to get the best bang for your buck, you want to dive into side missions and DLC. Let's start with the base game side missions, as this is the game I played the most out of all the other Batman games. Once I was finished with the main story, I had 69% of the game done, compared to every other game being about 40 to 60% fully done. But this game by far has the most content. Granted, some is more tedious than others. The city is divided into 3 islands, and each island has tons of challenges, with AR challenges to gain medals, fights with goons, bombs to defuse, and of course, way too many Riddler puzzles for me to do. It had a small Metroidvania feeling that I hadn't felt since Asylum, where you weren't able to do some side missions until progressing the main story, as you might have needed the Batmobile to gain access to it, as the Batmobile is used as a weapon and a utility item, and for some reason you can also race with the Batmobile, as the game has racetracks, which doesn't really feel like Batman, but they are pretty fun, I'd say, so sure, why not? But that Metroidvania feeling wasn't big, because I knew I just needed to progress the main story. But still, I tried to do as many missions as I could as they showed up. My favorite ones were with Catwoman, as she got herself caught by the Riddler, and you needed to solve puzzles to unlock keys to get a bomb off her neck. I do wish there was some more Catwoman outside the DLC, which we will get to in a bit, but it was nice to see her again. Other missions I tended to focus on were AR missions, which had a goal set up like bronze, silver, and gold medals, where you have to do certain objectives to achieve in a mission. AR missions were everywhere in terms of variety, with racetracks, stealth missions, goon fights, Batmobile missions, everything. There was a lot of them, and sometimes it's hard to get that gold medal, but it added good replayability for me. And I'll say, I don't like that you have to do a certain task to unlock them all, but not the biggest thing. And if I want all the achievements in this game, I will hate all these AR missions by the end of it. Like, why do I need all these races with all these goddamn Batmobiles? It doesn't matter. Like previous entries with Origins and City, other side missions were focused around other main villains. You had Two-Face, Robin Banks, which is just more stealth missions, Firefly, who's setting fire to fire departments, which leads to a Batmobile chase mission, and then the game has tons of side missions based around stopping the militia, which is led by the Arkham Knight and ScareCrow. These guys are a little bit stronger than your average goon, but tons of side missions based around that, which are still fun to do, but somewhat harder to find. And lastly, we have just random side missions, and I'll say they were some of the best ones. We slowly unravel a series of murders, or stop a giant man-bat who accidentally killed his wife when he turned himself into a bat. I feel like this game excels in base game content. Some may find it tedious, as there are a lot of side missions, but the rewards for these side missions give you a lot of level ups to upgrade your gadgets, suit, and Batmobile. Doing all of them was also extremely satisfying. But one negative thing is the game feels like it locks the ending of the game behind doing everything, which I do want to do, but as of making this, I still need to find 100% of the Riddler trophies, and I hate the goddamn Riddler. But overall, the side quests were a lot of fun, and it was great seeing a lot of villains return, and even getting to play as Robin and Catwoman again. Now let's talk about the crazy amount of DLC and expansion missions that this game has to offer. Like all other games, Arkham Knight is filled with DLC. A lot of them are challenge maps or skins that give you a nostalgic feeling, but Arkham Knight offers more story DLC than any other game. Let's start with the expansion missions first. Throughout the story, you unlock expansion missions that revolve around a villain. You have the Mad Hatter, Mr. Freeze, Killer Croc, and Raj Al Ghul, and all these expansions have a quick few missions within them and tend to end with a challenging fight. Except the Killer Croc mission, that one has a really fun duel fight with Nightwing, which makes it my favorite one, as it feels the most unique with the boss fights and the small control of Nightwing in your main playthrough. The Mad Hatter missions have you find different hostages and ends with a weird fight inside of a storybook in front of the Asylum, a nice throwback. It wasn't anything too crazy to me. Then we have the Raj Al Ghul mission, which has you follow a trail of blood which takes for goddamn ever, and then you end up finding a Lazarus pit, and you decide the fate of the League of Assassins. It was nice having that decision, but like the Mad Hatter ending, was just fighting a bunch of goons really. Nothing too crazy. And then finally, the Dr. Freeze expansion has you rescue his wife Nora from the militia. I didn't expect much from these missions as we already had a great Mr. Freeze DLC in Origins, but this one just shows how he isn't much of a villain and just wants to save his wife's life. It ends with a tougher battle than the Mad Hatter or League of Assassins, but it's just a giant battle in the Batmobile. Overall, all the expansion missions was a nice bonus and paced well with the story since you had to complete a certain amount of the story before being able to play them. Where the game shines more with DLC in some areas is the outside story missions called Arkham episodes. There's 6 quick missions where you play as different characters from the game. You have the Harley Quinn story pack where you play as Harley Quinn and your goal is to break Poison Ivy out of prison. It's only about 10 minutes long and it's mostly goon fights with some stealth kills, but it's fun seeing her animations and what utility weapons she has. Next one I played was the Red Hood story pack, which was placed shortly after the main campaign, but you get to play as the Arkham Knight, aka the Red Hood, and your main goal is to drive the Black Mask out of Arkham. Like the Harley Quinn pack, it was very short, but the utility and weapons he uses is quite different compared to Batman, as this guy is out to kill, but it's short and sweet at about 10 to 15 minutes of gameplay. Next is the Matter of Family Arkham episode, which was set before Arkham Asylum happened, and you play as Batgirl and Robin as you try to save Commissioner Gordon from the Joker. This is definitely the best one in terms of story and gameplay as we get to see Oracle before she gets shot by the Joker, and this one is definitely the longest as it takes about 45 minutes. The combat is very similar to Batman as, you know, you're playing as Batgirl, but the story provided makes it my favorite of the Arkham episodes. Next I did Catwoman's Revenge, which is also set after the main campaign, and you play as Catwoman stealing all of Riddler's money. For the second time in this series, you get to play as Catwoman, and the combat is very similar to that of Arkham City, but this was probably the most disappointing episode due to the final fight. You fight a bunch of Riddler bots after a quick stealth section, but the final fight has you dodging lasers, killing robots as the floor becomes electrified, and the combat, it's a lot of fun, but the floor doing damage to you makes it a lot harder with how much you'll be countering and dodging. You end up stepping on the electric parts of the floor a lot, and it ends up killing you. I still was able to complete it after about 30 minutes of trying, but it was definitely the most annoying episode just to that final boss fight. The 5th episode I did was the GCPD Lockdown, where you play as Nightwing stopping Penguin from escaping prison. It's like all the other ones. Some stealth and then goon fights. Took probably 10 to 15 minutes and was nice. It is also set after the main story of Arkham Knight as well. And then lastly, we did a Flip of a Coin, which was the second best story with what it adds, but also very short and set after the main campaign. You play as Robin as you aim to stop Two-Face's money processing plant, and the story it added is that Robin is postponing his honeymoon with Barbara, aka Oracle, aka Batgirl. The combat is like all other episodes with some stealth and goon fights, but I personally enjoyed the dialogue between the newlyweds the most. To me, the Arkham episodes were probably the best DLC in this game. I personally didn't really care about the challenges or the nostalgic skins all that much. It's a nice addition and adds some fun to the game, but the Arkham episodes on top of the expansion missions that the campaign offers makes Arkham Knight have the best DLC in my opinion. You can't really beat it. Arkham Knight as a whole was definitely my favorite Batman game, and it's the one that I aim to get 100% in first. I would like to get them all, but I don't really have the time. But the story of Arkham Knight, on top of all the side missions, all the extra DLC, the Batmobile inclusion, a lot of people did not like the Batmobile, but really, I found the Batmobile to be quite fun. Really, Arkham Knight is just the best Batman game in my opinion. That was the best one. And really, that's every Batman game with an in-depth analysis, I guess. I'll say these have been some of the best games that I've played, and it's definitely become one of my favorite series. For the time it was released, I feel all these games were revolutionary on how to make a great superhero game, and they educated me on Batman as a whole. Every game has its ups and downs, of course. Arkham Asylum has that Metroidvania style that I loved, and really set the series up with a great story, but lacked in boss fights. Arkham City introduced the open world of the series that every other game would improve upon, and introduced so many side quests, and on top of that, being able to play as another character for the first time. But I'll say it was a little short for my liking in terms of the main story. Origins was hated by a lot of people for some reason. I know it had a rough release like Arkham Knight, but it had the best boss fights in the series by a mile, and like Arkham City, had a good open world with fun and engaging side missions. And Arkham City is almost pure perfection in my eyes. The combat felt so fluid and easy. Every game had great combat and improved upon the last, but Arkham Knight felt so good in that aspect, along with the crazy amount of side missions and side quests, the DLC added story, and the best main story by a mile in these games. The biggest complaint I have, and almost everyone else unanimously agrees upon, is that Arkham Knight relies too heavily on the Batmobile. It's really fun that it was added, and I'll agree that it had a little too much involvement, but for me, it doesn't ruin the game at all, and more so adds to the experience. I loved all these games, and if I had to rank them all, I'd say Asylum was my least favorite, but it's still incredible. Origins and City are so close in terms of liking one more than the other, but would give the edge to City, and then Knight's my favorite of this series. I'm very happy I played through this entire series and enjoyed them all a lot more than I thought. And yeah, that's all I have to say about the Batman Arkham series. If you never played it, you were probably spoiled by this video, so I apologize for that, but I highly suggest you go experience these games for yourself. It's one of the best series I've ever played, and I picked up all these games for about $20 because they always go on sale everywhere, so you're missing out. Just add it to your wish list, wait it to go on sale, and then buy it. You will not regret it. Probably one of the best 20 bucks I've ever spent. And yeah, that's it. Thanks for watching. Bye.